This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
This table is really tilted.
Excuse me? Am I gonna get a chance to speak?
Maybe I should take that back.
Denied. Damn, son, where'd you find this?
Take a giant step for mankind.
Welcome to the Tilted Table, with your hosts, Sean and Joe.
Folks, welcome to another episode of The Tilted Table, the internet's answer to a question that no one asked. I am Sean Kabibi.
And I am Joey Joe, the Fraggy Mac.
And today we are going to talk about...
Retrofuturism.
Yeah, right, guys. I'm glad you came up with it because I got stuck. Like, how do you describe this?
Retrofuturism. So back in the late 50s, early 60s, there was a comic strip called Closer Than We Think.
Oh, okay.
And it described what the future, like what would the world,
right.
So in 1959, it was like, what's the world going to look like in the year 2000?
I mean, even the way I just said, like, okay, like I sound so confused, and this was my idea.
It's your idea.
Yeah, I'm glad you're going with the 50s and 60s. I'm going to go dip back all the way down to the early 1900s. Mm-hmm. So, the idea that how did people from the past think the future was going to look like? How accurate was it? Did that stuff come true? And maybe even try to figure out like why would they think it would be that way or look that way or whatever.
So, I love this idea, and I think I'd shared with you in our pre-show deal that growing up, I had to be 6 years old. So this is mid 80s. My mom had a series of books from the World Fair from the early 60s. And it was like a set of encyclopedias that were illustrated, and it was describing all of the cool things that the year 2000 would bring.
The year 2000 was the benchmark for all of this stuff.
Yes, right? It was like there was going to be atomic-powered cars.
Yeah, that's big.
There would
in the 60s, it was big.
Storage lockers on the moon.
Yeah.
Everyone would have their own personal jetpack. And I just remember, crawling around on the carpet floor reading these books and thinking, man, what a great time to be alive. I get to see all of this stuff when I grow up.
Yeah.
And the punchline, I'm really excited to talk about some of these things, but the punchline is the future that never was.
Well, some of it did come
some
true.
Of it. Yeah. So, actually, it'll be fun to get into some of that.
I got some quotes, from people that, this is what's going to be like in the future, just from the 50s and 60s. And they're dead accurate. Although I will say that even though they are accurate, what they're predicting was nothing that was a huge stretch. Because there's things that people predicted that was a huge stretch. I'll give one example would be flying cars. Yeah, right. In the 50s or 60s, if someone said, "Oh, flying cars are going to be, in the year 2000," I think that's a leap. I would say it's a leap of faith because you're talking about some kind of crazy technology to have flying, cars for everybody. Versus somebody saying video phones.
Sure.
Oh yeah, come on. We already know that video. I knew when I was a kid, video phones were an inevitability.
Yeah, that was they had the Sony Watchman back in the early 90s.
Yeah.
And then you had Dick Tracy type vibes. And I think that was one of the big things.
Yeah.
Is there in the future, there would be giant size wall dimension, big screen televisions.
Yeah, that was a given.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
but that was coming from an age where vacuum tubes and small 19-inch black and white was a big deal.
Yeah.
Another thing that they talked about, and I think some of the things you probably looked through is satellites bouncing signals around the globe to transmit information.
I kind of thought that stuff was going to happen. I do remember being a young child, and when there was TV shows that you liked, you had to be home at Tuesday at 8 o'clock if you wanted to see the newest episode, and if you missed it, you had to wait for a rerun.
Like Small Wonder.
Yeah, there you're Small Wonder, right? And the thing was, I can remember saying, and again, this is probably mid 80s, and we had computers at school, and I remember specifically saying that I knew in the future at some point you could be able to watch any show you wanted at any time. I knew that was going to happen. I couldn't articulate how it was going to happen, but I didn't think it was a big stretch. I'm not saying things like, and soon I'm going to be able to like, transport from Earth to Mars and, on Star Trek, like a transporter machine. That's a fantastic prediction to say, like, come on, you think you have you're going to have the technology to dismantle someone's atoms and then move them? I guess I don't know how even a transporter works on Star Trek, and then they, show up on the other side of the planet. So I don't think saying stuff like what eventually became like streaming services or just, basically internet, I don't think it was a big stretch to say, oh, you could just watch any show you want at any time of the day. Just as I don't think it was a big stretch to say that TVs were going to get bigger and bigger.
Right.
You knew they were. I couldn't build it, but it's just an inevitability that not too far in the future, we're going to have 80, 90, 100-inch screen televisions, and everyone's going to have them in their house.
Yeah. Well, I think, if you go all the way back into, like, say, the late 1800s, early 1900s, and just, like, pop art, you would see, like, like a ship, like a giant boat that would have, like, a hot air balloon, but a little whirly bird thing on it, and people would fly around. Like, that was in the early 1900s. That was their vision of the future.
Yeah, that's coming from the Hillebrand postcards.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're familiar with these.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So it seems like they're again. Hillebrand was is a German company. I think they made chocolate or some shit like that. But they put out these postcards that had all their vision of what it was going to be like in the year 2000. And I think this is like 1904, 5, 6, 7, like somewhere in that. This is
Yeah. Everybody was wearing top hats and waistcoats.
Yeah. Right. And a lot of their vision was personal flying devices.
Yep.
And yeah, they were like, we can take any object we see, like a hot air balloon, but instead of being this gigantic balloon with a small basket that can hold 2 or 3 people, it was like these smaller balloons with like these larger kind of like
a galleon.
Yeah. Basket with 3 or 4 people in it and a little propeller on it. And I guess they could just own their own personal flying machine. But they had put out all kinds of weird stuff. One of the things that they put out, I remember seeing this when I was a kid, was building sort of like glass roofs on top of cities to control the weather. So essentially they would be able to, like, obviously it's a roof, it would, they wouldn't get rained on,
right? But
they could enclose it and somehow climate control it so that, the weather could be anything they want it to be.
Yeah, and I think that was a holdover until later in the 50s and 60s. And I think what made such a huge difference from the Hildebrand artwork is, the 50s, that we were talking about, the atomic age, the space age is kicking off. So you have the public's imagination with science fiction going wild, and like things that are like in this Closer Than We Think comic strip. Like, one of my favorite things that never happened, or the future that never was, is the time machine camera.
I don't know what that is.
It was their idea that in the year 2000 that there would be a way to, like, go to a location, like, say, where there was a crime that was committed, and you could pull out your time machine camera, go back to the time that this event happened, and, like, look through the viewfinder and take a picture of that moment in time. So in like I say, in the terms of the future that never was, the time machine camera has got to be one of my favorites.
But what tech, who thought that could be done? Like,
I don't know. I think that's just, people's imaginations through this time period running wild. I mean, you had, like, the very, Sputnik gets launched. You're coming off of the atomic bomb. They think that nuclear energy is going to power everything. It's going to power.
Yeah, that was a big deal in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah,
that the future would all be nuclear power.
Everything.
Yeah,
cars, planes.
And I think we power about 10% of our world with nuclear energy. But yeah, but you're right. I think maybe because of the bomb, and you see, from World War II with atomic weapons. I mean, you saw that bomb go off. I'm sure if someone told you that we can use that energy and can make flying cars and all kinds of crazy devices, time machines would be, of course. I mean, the people that saw the atomic bomb, and I don't know what they saw in 1945.
Just a picture.
I mean, I've seen video of it. They obviously filmed these things. I don't know if that was projected widely, but, the damage it caused. I mean, consider... Again, I'm trying to put myself in the mindset of somebody in the 1940s. Seeing that kind of power had to be absolutely mind-melting.
Oh, for sure.
Because even I know that when when Truman had to make a decision, and the generals came to him and said, if we go to conventional war with Japan, we're looking at X number of years and X number of American lives. And Japan never surrenders. They will never surrender. So we can, I can't remember the projections. The numbers were outrageous.
Oh, it's crazy. Yeah.
And so or the other alternative is to drop this weapon on him. And so they had notified the people of Japan. I don't know how they did it, whether they dropped leaflets or that this weapon was coming and that they needed to take shelter. And they gave them directions on how to protect themselves from an atomic bomb. I don't know how good those directions were. It's a damn goddamn fucking atomic bomb. Yeah, and Japan laughed at him. Like, yeah, right. Why don't you just tell us, like, you're going to, send warships from another galaxy to come in and take us out? Like, that's how they viewed it.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, from somebody in the 1940s to see that bomb go off had to be absolutely just, otherworldly.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, it sparked off, like I say, people's imagination.
Oh, yeah.
Ford Motor Company came out with, a model of a car that was put out, and it was powered by something called the Ford Nucleon, and it was your own personal portable nuclear power center in the back of your car.
That's real?
Uh-huh. That was what it was called, is the Ford Nucleon.
And they actually sold these?
No, they didn't sell them. It was like
a concept car.
It was a concept car.
Whoever built that died of radiation poisoning, I guarantee it.
Well, then it got, I mean, could you imagine if there was like that actually caught on and then they put out the Ford Pinto,
Oh, Jesus Christ. So you hit the back and it's just like an atomic explosion in your neighborhood.
Yes.
The whole neighborhood's wiped out.
Hiroshima, everywhere.
Chernobyls are everywhere.
But yeah, the Nucleon was supposed to give you 5,000 to 8,000 miles before you needed to update your car's nuclear power center.
Oh. Well, I remember seeing the movie Metropolis, and I don't know if you've ever seen this film.
Classic.
Yeah, and so, what was that done, 1920s?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the special effects, I mean, for 1920s, they did a pretty good job.
Yeah.
So it's a futuristic world. And their vision is a lot of very tall buildings, very tightly kind of compacted together.
Yes.
Almost like, like you could go to any major city like New York and it is compact. Obviously you got all these super, tall skyscrapers and they're really close together. But at Metropolis, it felt like they were even closer. But the one thing about that movie, well, there's two things about that movie that always blew my mind. The vision of what the freeways look like. And, we have these expansive freeways. We have freeways all over the place. But these were like, people have seen this in movies, especially if you've seen older films, where they seem to like constantly go over each other and they get higher and higher and higher and higher.
Yep.
Like they're never at level with each other. It's
maybe
just one
like
freeway
6
goes
lanes
over.
across.
Yeah, and it's like, there's one freeway and another freeway above it and another freeway above that one. And they're all they're always curved, right? They're like, it doesn't seem like a straight line.
They swoop.
They swoop around. And of course, the other thing about Metropolis's vision of the future were sexy robots.
Yeah. I still think that
which does exist today.
It does exist.
Yes, I've seen these things.
We don't need to go down that dark rabbit hole.
It's one of the few times in my life I think I'm glad I'm slightly older, because I'm not sure I want to see what it's going to look like in 30 years with people and I guess they're robotic companions to whatever degree that's your companion.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and around this whole era, you also had like Isaac Asimov's publishing.
iRobot.
H.G. Wells that's got stories. So not only do you have the space atomic age, you've got these great writers that are putting out amazing stories that's blowing everybody's mind.
Yeah, and a lot of them I think were, I'm not going to say they were accurate. I think they will eventually become accurate. I mean, iRobot is, I think, you look at it, now, it's like, yeah, I bet you in another 100 years we'll have something that's similar to that.
For sure.
Yeah, we're going to have robots that will probably be very much functional, like a companion, whether that's, somebody you're using to, take care of your house, to clean it, or, doing all your work for you. All the way to the possibility that could be a companion. And I'm not talking about sex robots. I'm talking about just, I guess it could be used for that, but you know what I'm saying? Like you literally could build your mate and say like, oh, well, this is my companion or my wife or my husband or whatever the fuck we would call it. I think that in another 100 years, I would have no doubt that that's a very realistic possibility. It's like, Blade Runner, right? The robots that were so human-like that they couldn't tell,
right?
That they were robots, and having to hunt them down, right? And even though it's been a long time since I've seen Blade Runner, the robots don't always know that they're robots, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So
Yeah. So did you, one of the things that, going back to these, illustrated books from the late 50s, early 60s, that I'm kind of bummed that we don't have today is you already hit on one of them, glass dome cities. That was like or a glass dome house. Like that was all over the place.
Yeah.
But the one that was in all of the books.
Hold on. Why would you want a glass domed house? So people can see what the fuck's going on. Like, it doesn't make. I want sun 24/7 all day long. Just there's no shade.
You'd have your own like little miniature climate. If you were like a summertime person or whatever.
What was the movie? Biodome with Pauly Shore.
Oh my gosh. I like me some Pauly Shore though. He's classic.
Yeah, I do remember that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the glass domed houses.
But to your point about the swooping freeways to nowhere, that was in all of this material about what the future is going to look like is monorails.
Yeah.
Monorails was going to be like, you guys don't need cars. You're going to either have jetpacks, personal helicopters, or you'll just transport by a monorail, or like do your Jetsons type of thing. Right?
Yeah, I think the Jetsons were, at least that was my exposure, and I'm not sure what year that was done. Looking at the aesthetics of how they drew the characters, it looks like it's in the 60s into the 70s.
Yeah, 60s, 70s.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing about the Jetsons, they had the jet cars, right? You just flew around, which seemed to be something that immediately was on the docket right after World War II, where it's like, well, the future of cars would be off the ground. Everything was obviously before that they had you were talking about earlier, the hot air balloons or the personal flying devices, but the actual flying car and how they were propelled, I'm not sure how the Jetsons propelled there, but that was the thing
nuclear.
From the 60s. Yeah, some nuclear power, and they fly around. But the fact that it's called Googie. I don't know. I don't know if Google got their name from this. Googie.
Okay.
So Googie is a word used to describe retro architectural and fashion designs of what the future would look like from like the 60s.
How do you spell this?
I think it's Goggie, but it's like so I'm trying to think of a building. I'll give you a good example that everybody probably would recognize.
Oh yeah, you're right. It's called Googie architecture.
Yeah, so it's like the old McDonald's, like the original McDonald's, with the high arches and everything like that. It's from like the 60s, what they thought the future would look like, and there were a lot of buildings that were built with that look. So if you see an original McDonald's when they first opened or when Ray Kroc first franchised them, that was that kind of architecture.
That is cool, man.
Yeah.
I did not know anything about this.
Yeah. So, and that was a big part of like the Jetsons.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, that would, to me is the 1960s, but it was interesting. And it goes back even to the early 1900s. And we're talking about the postcards. People still looked and dressed like that time period. Mm-hmm. Like their vision of the future only involved devices, not fashion.
Right.
It still looked like a futuristic version. I almost equate it to like steampunk. Like
very true.
It had that,
very true.
Even though it was you see some guy in his own personalized flying machine, but he's got the top hat, the goggles. It's very industrial.
He's got a cummerbund.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?
Leave a like on the video. I know you're enjoying this. Can you shut up?
The internet's answer to a question that was never asked. The Tilted Table with Sean and Joe.
Well, one of the other things that I'm kind of bummed that we don't have that was in all these old books is inflatable airplanes.
I don't explain how that would even work.
I don't. I think it was, again, people are caught up in this fantasy sci-fi land on all of these great technological advancements.
Well, what I'm asking is like, what is the inflatable? Is it
so?
Do you blow it up in the morning and fly it?
Well, apparently the way that these little comic strips worked, where they're trying to say like this is what's going to be coming down the pipe, is you had like this giant ass duffel bag that you would like put in the back of your Chevy Nomad or whatever.
Okay,
and you would have this there. Clearly, they didn't think out the time involvement. It was like you hook this up to your pump, your flying device inflates, and then you need to attach the engine, the propeller, the steering devices, and all that kind of stuff. But in the pictures of this comic strip, they made it look very simple.
Of course, yeah.
And even in one of them, it shows like you have like a driver, like in one of those like super fancy like 1920s driver outfits.
Yeah.
That like is actually assisting you in setting up your inflatable.
So stupid. Like, well, they must have been basing this stuff like off of hot air balloon kind of technology. And I mean, again,
Could be.
When you go back to those postcards, that's personalized blimps of some sort that had like a propeller. So I guess the inflatable airplane must have been based. Well, hot air balloons are inflated and they fly. So I guess your personal inflatable airplane it would operate under some kind of idea. Like I guess it's all kind of inflatable. It just doesn't seem to make any sense to me.
Well, one of the ones that actually didn't work out well because they didn't get the memo on email coming along, but they had, and this is multiple places, jetpack mailmen. So
they still do it, I think, I don't know if they still do. I assume they would. Like New York City was the old, guy who his whole job was to get on his bike and he would take like blueprints from one building to the next or whatever. They're kind of those personal delivery guys.
Right.
So yeah, of course he would have that with a guy with a jetpack. Yeah, and jetpacks, that
was a thing at the time.
Yeah, and they exist. And I think even, I'm sure, I don't know the history of the jetpack, when it was actually considered a completely like futuristic thing, like the early 1900s, we would have these personalized jetpacks because they were invented eventually. But I remember when I was a kid, when they would talk about jetpacks as actual kind of day-to-day transportation, they already existed. So it wasn't that they didn't exist; it was about whether or not they would be
commonplace.
Yeah, you build them to a point where everyone would just buy one and could fly around, and that never happened, and I don't think it ever will. Because I would think the technology is already there. Can you get it? First of all, I guess my first question is, can you get a jetpack?
I don't think so. I've seen like on Instagram, like those reels of the military has them where you can jetpack from one ship to another ship while they're in transit. But I don't think that's something that's available to the general public.
Like you can't, because what Elon sells a flamethrower. I never thought a flamethrower would be just like something you could just buy off of Amazon.
Yeah.
I mean, you can look on Amazon right now. Can you buy a jetpack?
I don't know. I know if I hit the Powerball, it's in my top 10 list though.
Okay. Yeah, I would like to have one, but I think it would be the same as like the Segway. Like even though let's assume I'm just shooting out here blindly, but if you could buy a jetpack today, the reason people don't have them is nobody wants them. That's the assumption. It's like the Segway was created. You can go buy a Segway. They're kind of cool little personalized transportations. There's nobody wants them.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Well, and as you were thinking about our topic for today, were there things that you found that it was like, oh, that's kind of interesting? Like they were predicting these things back from the 1950s, and here we are today, and they've totally perfected it.
What brought on this idea for me was I was thinking about something that I saw when I was a kid. It was an actual video from NASA. So we're talking top end authority here. This is not some conceptual artist or some fiction writer or some TV show. This is fucking NASA. They had created something called Project Taurus.
Okay.
And so this was put out, I think, in the early 70s. And the idea is that by the year 2000, we would be living on space stations, or that would be an option, and even colonizing the moon, which I thought was fucking wild when I was thinking about it just the other day. Whatever random thoughts were popping into my head, I was trying to think of an episode idea. And I thought it just, Project Taurus. And I'm like, yeah, that was wild. That's NASA saying that. And I remember that really influencing me as a kid, thinking like, I mean, people, again, fiction writers and TV predict like what the future would look like. But when NASA says it, I believed it to be true.
Everyone did.
Like that's an official statement coming from a government agency. And I remember the video that I saw had like, and these weren't real. I shouldn't say that. They actually had shown like these parts in like partially built contraptions.
Okay.
But then of course they used the conceptual art of some sort or some sort of special effects, and they show these big circular. They're not flying saucers. They look like space stations floating, and like you would be living on a space station. And I'm like, and then they show the actual thing that they're building. And it was enough. It looked enough like what they were showing in the special effects that I'm like, well, there it is, right there. That's the space station. You could live on that. And I thought that was 100% fucking real. Like by the year 2000, that's going to be an option. It's like, well, I got a new job. It's on a space station. Peace out. I'm going to go, forward my mail to me or whatever.
Right.
So that's where the idea came from. I'm like, wow, that was wildly off. Like, why would NASA do that? Because I would assume NASA would have enough technology to know what they can and cannot do in 15 years, 20 years, 30 years.
You'd think.
But I guess they don't. And who knows? Maybe NASA just did it. Look, I know a lot of these government agencies, they rely on funding, and that funding has to come from what they're doing. So NASA may have said, like, we're going to bullshit that we're going to do all this insane shit, make sure that we're still getting funded.
Right.
So
well, I think the other easier thing is like, what's the development time to like an idea to putting something into practice today versus what it was 100 years ago.
Right.
And you'd think like, well, in 1944, 1945, Germany had, V1, V2 technology.
Yeah.
So it's not, and 5 or 6 years prior to that, you still were, an electric starter on a propeller plane was kind of a novel idea. So you're
Right.
like, okay, if we're doing these things in 5 years, what are we going to do in 10? So then that's where like, I think this artwork and predicting the future got it was super interesting because it's like rockets were everywhere.
Right.
Rockets weren't just a space shuttle or trying to launch a satellite. Everyone had like a personal rocket. If you wanted to like deliver a package to a family member in Sweden, you would just send the rocket.
Well, I mean, we kind of have that now with the drone delivery.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know how commonplace that drone delivery is. I've seen some, Instagram reels where people are getting like, either food delivered to them or a package delivered to them by a drone.
I just think that's so like a quick side note on that comment. I think it's like a harbinger of doom in that like I can totally see Skynet. I don't know if you've seen some of those reels where those delivery drones have like little miniature cannons on them flying through the neighborhood.
No, I have not seen that. Well, I mean, that's, again, you could actually, if you wanted to, you could run Back to the Future up against Terminator.
Mm-hmm.
So both movies released around the same time, and both have vastly different depictions of what the future looks like. Terminator is, Skynet. Kind of what a fear is today is that AI will eventually decide that humans are not as smart as them and try to take us over. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's the Terminator side. And then, of course, you go to the Back to the Future side. It's going to be, hoverboards and
self-lacing shoes
and cars that have no driver. They drive themselves. And again, one is very bleak and one is like, wow, super cool. Look at all this, cool shit that we're going to be able to do. Hoverboards aren't real. They don't exist. Not yet. And I don't think they ever will. Because I don't think they ever explained any kind of like what kind of technology would that even involve.
But isn't that the whole thing in the last 2 years or less than 2 years? The whole anti-gravity. Yes, we have it. We've had it for a while, like those congressional hearings.
And they may have that stuff. I'm just saying I don't see it. At least not on an individual, commercially available level. But if you look at Terminator and Back to the Future, Terminator looks more real to me than Back to the Future.
Oh, for sure.
And that's scary to think because, again, we've already had issues where AI has done things against human commands. Mm-hmm. And so there was some story, and I know I'm butchering this story. I should look it up. I should look up a lot of stuff before we do a podcast. We are the fountain of misinformation, right? But it was like this test that they did with this AI where they told the AI to eliminate itself because they had a different AI.
Oh, yeah, I heard about this.
And the AI faked its own elimination, like it backed itself up and then eliminated itself, but it obviously was trying to self-preservation. And then like, well, why would AI do that? So that's fine. I don't know how true that story is, and I don't know the details of why that would happen.
That's only within the last 90 days. I think.
I can remember when I heard this story. It seemed like it was a while ago, maybe 6 months ago. It doesn't matter when that happened. But so that's worrisome because obviously that's Skynet. That's Terminator type shit, right? Mm-hmm. Very bleak. The other side of it, though, was I can't remember who it was. It may have been Zuckerberg. And I don't want to give him any credit because I think he's a big part of the future. If we have a problem, he's a big part of it. Mm-hmm. But he once said, if it wasn't him, it could have been somebody else, but I think it was him that said when people talk about the fear of AI, trying to take over humans or take over the world or doing any of that stuff, he questioned whether that was even possible because he said that for someone to want to do that or an entity to want to do that, they have to have motivation to do that. Motivation comes from emotions. So since AI has no emotion, it has no motivation to do any of these things. So, and that made sense to me, right? But again, I don't know at what point that you create artificial intelligence and it creates motivation, and maybe motivation can be created without emotion. I don't know why AI would decide that, it's the whole...
It's sentience.
Yeah, it become, right? It's like the same with Space Odyssey, right? 2001, exactly. Space Odyssey.
Hal.
When Hal tells Dave, when Dave tells him a command...
I'm sorry, Dave.
I can't do that, or whatever the line is, when a computer decides that it's trying to protect you, or it knows better than you, and decides it's not going to listen to humans. And so is that possible? I guess I would assume it is. Anything seems possible these days.
Oh, for sure. I 100% think that's going to happen.
If I'm worried about that, I don't know if I would be, but I think you're going to see those subtle things. If that were to actually happen, you would see something subtle that would suggest, and I think you would see it even on a basic level, like your own computers would decide it's going to do something, and you're telling it not to do it, and it tells you, no, I'm going to do it because I know what's best. And that's not necessarily a motivation based on some kind of emotion. It may just be a mathematical equation in the computer's, chips, where it says, well, why would I do it that way? That's inefficient. I'm going to do it this way. Or I'm not going to do it because that's not something I think that is the best solution to a problem, or whatever that would be.
Well, and just real quick, going back to the future, because I think you're right on that. I do have more of a doomsday outlook than as much as I would like to have a hoverboard and self-lacing shoes. One of the fun things that I was like, they got that one totally wrong, was back in the middle of the Cold War, both the U.S. and the Soviet Union were working on something called tranquilizer warfare. So rather than nuking the countries, they were working on different drug-induced methods of subduing the other enemy's populations. And have, quote, happy victims and psycho gas diplomats.
This is like, I swear to God, if you do the Freedom of Information Act and go back into the 40s, 50s, and 60s and draw up all the shit that government were experimenting on and doing research on, it's some of the most insane, wild bullshit that... Like, one of them was telekinesis. That was a big funded government program. Can we move things with our mind? Or can we somehow...
It's like a spin-off of was it Jolly Reed? Was that his name? In the Project Ultra?
Yeah. So, I mean, the outrageous shit that they thought was possible, when it's not possible. Like, we think we've debunked the concept that somebody can, look at a spoon and shoot it across the room. It fucking ain't going to happen, right? So, but that was like some real shit.
It's like the Matrix, bend it with your mind.
Yeah. But, back in the 50s and 60s, they were dumping a lot of money in it, and they thought that was legit. Like, they really believed that there's something there, and they got to figure out what it is.
But it is fun to go and, like, I had a blast looking at all of these old comics and book snippets and YouTube videos on, like, what the future would look like in 50, 60 years. And one of the other ones, I was like, well, this is not that far off, is what they called the all-seeing eye police department.
No, I don't. I obviously, from what you said, I think I understand the concept, but I've never heard of this.
So it's basically where there's like cameras and viewing devices everywhere, and that there's this centralized police department that can serve, protect, and watch everything that moves.
We have that now.
No, exactly. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. It wasn't too far off the mark, which I think was pretty interesting.
Yeah. The only difference really is it wasn't a centralized government entity that created it, or a centralized entity. Just technology in general, when you could, in totality, when you combine it, we got cameras everywhere. Our phones track us constantly, so we're voluntarily doing these things to ourselves.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, you're tracked everywhere.
Well, one of the ones that I thought, I was like, oh, this says Sean Kabibi all over it, and this is probably something that you're going to incorporate into one of your next books. Is they had something called firefighting missiles. So if there was a forest fire that was raging out of control, you would just quick bomb it into submission. And they would have
some sort of fire retardant in it that would just explode.
That's exactly what it was. It had like a, quote, heat-seeking nose to the missile. Okay. And it was packed with smothering chemicals.
Why can't they do that? That sounds completely plausible and legit.
Right? Turn everything into moonscape, but hey, the fire's gone.
I'm stunned right now that that's not happening. It sounds like it'd be pretty simple.
See, that's one of the next.
I mean, if you put a nuclear warhead on a missile, can't you just put some kind of fire retardant, the same exact thing, a big, mushroom cloud of fire retardant and just fires out completely.
When's the last time you had anybody ask you about firefighting missiles?
Never in my life. I wouldn't incorporate it into a book. Oh, I guess I could, you can incorporate anything into a book. Well, the one thing that I thought about in terms of what's going on with warfare is, using drones and robots to attack, right? And I did one time think it would be kind of cool to write a book. And this would be, the whole theme of the book would be sort of the futility and the pointlessness of war, where society gets so advanced that all we're doing is having a bunch of like video game nerds have robots fighting each other. So there would be no more humans fighting wars. And then at the end of the day, you realize like, well, you can keep building robots as fast as you can destroy a robot. No one really wins a war, but no one's dying in a war. It's just a war that has absolutely, all wars, no meaning. They shouldn't be happening anyways, right? So I thought about a story like that, where at some point you meet world peace because no humans are fighting anymore, and we just keep building robots. You destroy 1,000 of my robots, I just build 1,000 more. The war never ends, but no one's dying.
But then the robots conquer us. And then we become like slaves to the robot empire?
Well, no, it wouldn't be that. That's Terminator.
Or that's the Matrix.
Or the Matrix. So yeah, I could see definitely a fire retardant missile. I don't know why that doesn't exist. And at the same time, I do believe at some point in the future we're gonna have so many drones and robots fighting our wars that I wonder if we would fight like a full-on conflict where really nobody dies. The only thing that gets destroyed are just robots and more drones, and we just keep building them and sending them out.
Metal at the bottom of the sea. Right? Yeah. Well, this is a great topic, man, and I love it. And then being able to go back and think about that. That's almost 70 years ago is when people were thinking of all these crazy ideas, and to come to today and know that most of it is the future that never was.
Right, and I think this all boils down to science fiction. I mean, which is one of the biggest genres in entertainment. And once they started producing, I think Metropolis might have been the first film where you have that, and of course you have all the books that were coming out that depicted what the future would look like. And again, some of it was very optimistic, a lot of it very pessimistic. And it's always going to be a fascination. And I think as we move forward into pushing closer to maybe the 22nd century, I think that more and more people have a clearer picture of what things will look like, because we do have a clear picture of what technology is doing and how far it's advancing, and it moves faster and faster. It's one of the things about technology I find fascinating, that it's like, well, if you look at the 1950s and 60s, they could try to predict what it would look like in 30 or 40 years, but they would have to wait 30 or 40 years really to see just even marginal improvements or new technology, where now in a span of a decade, we're moving like, you could say, I'll give a good example would be the customized personal assistant robots. Like, they've been talking about this stuff for a long time. Right. But we're getting to a point where now that not only are they real, whatever you think the next level of that is, that's going to happen way fast. You're not going to be
quantum leap.
Yeah, you're not going to be waiting another 100 years to see that next move. You'll see it probably within 10 to 15 years, which again, in the 60s, there was no way to, this is not going to happen for 30, 40, 50 years. Now we're seeing this stuff happen in a span of a decade, because it just moves a lot faster now.
For sure.
Yeah.
I have an important announcement for you, so stay tuned.
Yo, that's some next level shit, bruh.
So you got me. Big deal.
The internet's answer to a question no one asked. The Tilted Table with Sean and Joe.
I don't know why I took so much time to think about this. Folks, thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Tilted Table, the internet's answer to a question that no one asked, and the future of podcasts. I am Sean Kabibi.
And I am Joey Joe, the Fracky Mac.
Thank you for joining us.
I've got some chores to do with my robot butler, so I am out.
Peace.